Welcome to the part 2, the sequel of Java Basics. So I'm pretty much going to pick up where we left off last time. Just one more thing that I wanted to go over before we moved on. So the first thing I wanted to go over are data structures, and I wanted to go over two data structures. There are, of course, more. If you want to see me talk about more data structures, then leave a comment. Arrays. Array is a type of data structure, and it holds data, basically. It can hold multiple types of data, the same data. It can hold like a list of numbers, which is better than having just a separate integer value for like 20 different values. Just have one array that does it. So you have to import arrays, import java.util.array. And so declaring array is just string or the type of string, like it can be boolean, int, long, float, short, whatever the hell you're using. Square brackets, and the name of the array. And then if you want to just have a random list and just give it some initial values, you can just say like int my nums are 10, 20, 30, 40. And let's say you wanted to set a set size. Like you only wanted to hold 5 values or 7 values. You say double array equals new double in a square bracket 7. That is the set size. So back over in our main file, let's just get started by erasing everything that we've done so far and moving on. So let's start with arrays. So first we're going to go to the top of our file and import java.util.arrays. So just get that typed out. Now, the first thing that we're going to want to do is declare our array. So I'm just going to go with a string array. So string square brackets, and then let's just call this cars because we'll fill this up with the names of cars, for example, right? And one important thing to remember is that the first index, or like the first spot in the array, is known as slot 0 or index 0, and it goes to index 1, 2, 3, and so on. But slot 0 or slot 1 is slot index 0. And let's try to add things to this empty array, because right now it's empty, it's just been declared. Let's try and add things to it. So I'm going to try doing that using a for loop. So you want to do with basic for int I equals 0, because the 0 index is the first index. So we start at 0, and we go I is less than 5, right? And then I plus plus, because we're incrementing by 1 each time, because we want to look at every single element in the array. But before we can look at anything, we have to put information in. So let's get information from the user, system.out.println, and say enter in a car name, right? Because cars is the name of our array, and we want what's in our array to match what's in the array, or it's going to get confusing. So let me just fix up this typo I made right here. I'm just going to get rid of this single quotation mark and add in a semicolon. And because we're getting information from the user, we have to make sure we're importing scanner. So I'm just going to scanner, I'm going to call it S equals new scanner, system.in. But not with the 9, but with a parenthesis. Okay, so now let's actually get the information. So let's just create a string and save the information of that. So let's do string car. Let's call it a car because it's a car equals string.nextLine. Okay, so now that we have that, let's add this to the collection. So cars at position I. So remember, we're at position I, position 0, position 1 equals our variable car. Right, so we're setting at the position we're indicated by the for loop, and we're setting it equal to the value we just got from the user. So now you'll notice that our cars has a squiggly red line under it, which means there's an error. And the error we have here is that we never initialized cars. We just declared it. So we have to go up to the top and initialize cars. And we do that simply by adding an equals to and then 2 curly braces. Now let's print out the values of car, right? So let's control C, let's just copy this entire for loop, right? And we'll just say, here are the cars you entered. And we'll just print out this. So we do system.out.println cars at I. Let's go to that line. And to make sure we're only going as far as the remember to the right, cars dot length. Fix that typo. And semicolon. So let's test this out. Let's do javac main.java and then java main. So we see we get enter name. So let's just give it any old name. Say that. And as we can see by this error, we messed up in our initialization of our array. So to fix this, we have to give it an initial length. So let's do string cars equals new string, and let's give it a value of 6. So now if we compile and run this again, we will see that it prompts us for a car name. Let's give it a car name. It prompts us another car name. Let's just give it another car name. Say that, and another one, and it's going to do this each time there's a for loop. So every time it's going to ask us for a new car, right? So it's got to come up with a car name, and let's call it that. I don't know much about cars, so I come up with these off the top of my head. So whatever comes to the top of my brain first is what goes down my fingers. So that, and as you can see, it goes back and it prints out all the car names. But as you can see, the last value of the array is null. And that's because the length of our array is 6. And in our for loop for filling it up, the initial for loop, we are only going up to 5 and leaving the last spot blank. And so automatically the array fills in that slot with a null value. So that's pretty much it for basic arrays. Let's move on to the next thing of importance. And that will be our next data structure, the ArrayList. So basically, it holds data like an array, and to use it, you got to import it. Import java.util.list at the top of your file, and this is your declaration ArrayList data type in your less than sign, greater than sign. The name of it. It's declaration equal sign initialization new array, and then your data type, followed by your parentheses and a semicolon. Now let's take a look at that in the IDE. So now back over here in our file, let's go to the top of the file and just import list. So import java.util.list. So we're going to keep most of what we have so far because this is similarity between arrays and ArrayList is extremely similar. So let's just modify a couple things. So let's just delete our array line and let's just create a new ArrayList. So ArrayList and less than sign, and we can just any data type we want. I'm just going to go with string and use cars as the same example just because it's the simplest thing to do. So less than sign, string, greater than sign, and the name of it, let's keep it cars for simplicity, equals new ArrayList. Data type we're going to specify it as string again, and then in parentheses and semicolon. So immediately there, we're going to see that we get some underlines. And one of the first underlines we're going to deal with is the length. So there's no length. You do dot size, parentheses, because this is a method, which we'll be discussing later in the video, of the ArrayList class. And the next thing we want to be looking at is adding elements to it. So it's simply this. You do the name of the array, ArrayList, so cars in this case, dot add, and in parentheses, because this is another method, and then we're going to add to it car, which is the thing we're adding, and this is simple. There's no, you can add a certain next, but because we're just regular adding, we're just doing adding car. And the next change we're going to have to do is retrieving elements, so it's just the name of the array, so cars in this instance, dot get, and the location of where we're retrieving it, so get I, will pull the correct element from the array list at the correct index I, which is where we are when we're printing. Okay, so what you can see I'm doing now is I'm just doing a quick modification of the our for loop print method to make it more visually appealing. So at the top, I'm just going to say here are the values, and then inside the for loop, I'm going to say at index I, here's the value at index I. That's all I'm really doing. If you don't understand it, leave a comment, and I'll help you out. It's that simple. Okay, so now let's compile and test it. So let's do Java main, not Java, and we run it, and you'll see that this is going to work pretty much exactly the same. It's going to ask for different cars. Let's just give it the same number, whatever cars. It doesn't have to be whatever, the cards, whatever. Let's just give it some values, yada yada yada, whatever that, and share one of those. This is a fantastic voiceover by me of something I did 2 days ago, last week. And so as you can see, we can get out the live print method, and we get the nice, here are the values stored, and we get at 0, there's that, at that, there's that, at that, there's that, at that, there's that. So we can see the big key difference between this and the array is that there is no null value at the end of this. Because when you're creating an array list, you're not giving it a set size necessarily, and so there is no null value at the end because we're just adding values up to a certain point, and then that becomes the size of the array list. So then when we go to print it out, there is no extra value at the end tacked on where we had the value. So now we move on to the real meat and bones of Java, object-oriented programming, or OOP. So OOP programming, which is what Java is, basically you're using methods that'll help you do multiple things faster, easier, and better. So now let's look at some more vocab. Yay! So a method or a subroutine, which I've been talking about a lot, is a section of code that can be called anywhere in the program, right? So about methods. Parameters are part of the definition of the method, which I will show you when we go back to the VS Code. And arguments are what is passed to the method, like in the add method and the get method, we were passing values between the parentheses to the method. A void method basically means there's no return value. Return, that means it's returning a value. So in your method, you're going to have return, and it's going to say a value. So you return, like, say, 12 or 21, or it's doing some math, and you're returning the value of the math. A static method can be called without a class, and an instance method needs a class call to be used. So that's basically some basic vocab we're going to look at, but what really happens is we got to look at the code. So let's do that now. So here we are back in Visual Studio Code, and I'm just going to create a new file. I'm going to call this methods.java, because what we're going to do is we're going to create a new main method, and we're just going to pass some parameters to a simple area method, right? Public static void main string square brackets args. So with our newfound knowledge of vocab, we can look at the definition of our main method and understand a few things. So public, which means it's public, it's viewable all the other methods. We got static, we got void, which means there's no return value. We got main, which is the name of the method. And then we have our parameters, which are part of the definition of the method. So now that we got that out of the way, let's just create a simple method that'll just get the area of a rectangle, right? So let's get started. So public, because we can call this anywhere, right? So we're in public, and we need a return value, right? So we're returning a value. This is an area method. We're returning a value. So the return value is, say, type double, right? Because we can pass this any old value, like a decimal, it can be a whole number, whatever. And we're going to call it area public double area. And now in parentheses, we're going to be adding in the parameters. So we're going to be needing a length, of course, so we're going to have it type double. And we, of course, need a width. So we're going to make that double too, because they need to be compatible when doing math, right? So we now have public, double area, and in parentheses, double length, double width. And you can see that it's giving a little problem, right? And that's because there's no return value, because we're specifying a double, and we need to specify a return value. So we're just going to specify a temporary value of 1, just as an example. Now to get the actual code, we need to create area, right? So let's do declare a variable, double, area. Now we need to initialize area, because we got this return an undeclared value. And so we're going to say area is length times width, right? Because area, that's how you get that area rectangle, length times width. It's basic math. Everyone knows it. And then we're going to return area. Okay, so now we want to get work on the actual using the area method itself. And we want to ask stuff from the user. So to be able to do that, we need to import scanner. So import java.util.scanner at the top of our file. Make sure we spell import right. Okay, so now let's go into the main method and let's get started. So let's just say scanner s equals new scanner, parentheses system.in, not a 9, that is not how you type. So now that we've got that, let's ask for the information, right? So system.out.println, and let's say enter in a length, right? So get that typed out, enter in a length for the rectangle. And now we want to actually save the value of rectangle, so we do double, and let's just call this L so we don't confuse it between the other length, equals S dot next double. And let's do the same thing for width. So just copy this and paste it again, and just replace length with width, and just place L with W. So now that we've collected both our values for L and W, let's actually just compute area, right? So just for show, we're just going to print it out the area. We're just going to do a nice print statement. We're going to say, here is your area, something like that, and then we'll pass in the area. So just, you can type what I type, or you can say, here's the area. You can say area, parenthesis space, whatever you want to do, as long as you're conveying that is what you're printing, as long as it makes sense. It's good coding practice. Okay, so now to actually get the area, we're going to say plus after our print statement, and we're going to say area. There we go. Open parentheses, and we're going to pass in our two variables, length and width, and they have variables passed in will match up with the variables in the definition of the method. So length and width in the passing will match up to the length and width of the method. So you can see we had a little error, and that's because we didn't define the method as static. It's just something we had to fix. You'll run into these things, you gotta fix these things. So now if we go to run it, we will see that we will be prompted for a basic question that we gave it. Please enter in the length for the rectangle. Let's give it a number of that. Small numbers, don't be big. And you can give it another width, and you can see that it prints out the area correctly as a double. So there is another way that we can print out the area. So we can save it to a variable and then print it out. So if we do, say, double area equals area, and we just pass in the same parameters, and then we just replace the line in our print statement, we will get the correct value. So let's just do that real quick, just simply by deleting that because we named the value area, so there's no differences. So let's save it, compile it, let's run it, enter in value 3, say that's value 5, and say the area is 15. So we see it still works. So I want to show you another way of printing out the area using a different type of method without a return value, a void method, if you remember from the vocab session. So this is a very simple way to do it. So we're going to do public static void. I'm going to call this toString because we're taking a value and we're putting it into like essentially what is a string. And we're just going to pass to it double area. So we're just going to print this out, system.out.println, and we're going to just copy literally this, and we're just going to put it right here. Because essentially we're performing the same exact thing, we're just doing it in a method and in one cleaner line. So say we wanted to call this again, we don't have to write out this whole line again, we just write out toString and we pass in an area. So literally we just delete this, and we call the toString method, and we just pass in our area. And in fact, we can shorten this to one line because the same value. We just pass in length and width. And then we can delete this line, and this is going to accomplish the same exact thing as it did before. So if we compile it, see that there's no runtime errors, and then we run it, enter the value, see what's so prompted for values. Let's just say 6, and that's in the value 4. Okay, so we should expect to say the area of the rectangle is 24, which we do. So this is one way to write methods and use them using just a one class and methods inside the class. Now there is another way to create what is called essentially an object. So you create the object and you can use its own methods. Like ArrayList and scanner is how we create a scanner object, and then we use the scanner methods. And like we did over in here, where we created an object and we used the methods, right? So I'm going to show you how you can do that, and I'm going to continue using the rectangle method rectangle example as it's the simplest to do. So let's create a new file, and we're going to call this rectangle.java. Call it whatever you want. I'm calling it rectangle, and I'm keeping it capital because it looks nicer when you do it this way. So, what do we need about a rectangle? What does a rectangle have? What do we know about a rectangle? A rectangle has a length, it has a width, and it has an area. We need to set that information about the rectangle because right now it's just an empty thing and it does nothing. So let's create some variables. So let's say double length, double width, double area. To be able to instantiate this or call it, we need to create what is called a constructor, which is essentially what you do. So you call it and then you use it, like with the scanner. So let's just do that right now. So public, and this is how you do any constructor, public or private. What we're doing public rectangle, and you have to call the name of the class. And this will be a no argument constructor. This is what a no argument constructor looks like. So this can just set default values for it. So we can say length equals 0. We can say width equals 0. And then we could say area equals 0. So that is a no argument constructor, which means there's no arguments passed to it. Like when we are creating the scanner, we pass to it system.in, but in this case we're not passing to rectangle anything. And so let's say we do want to pass to rectangle a certain value. We can just create another constructor, public rectangle, open parentheses, double W, double L. So we're passing to it a width and a length. So we want to make sure we're setting the current values of our rectangle to what we're passing to it. Width equals W, and we say length equals L. So we're taking these values and we're assigning them to the values we passed when we create a rectangle. So now that we have our constructors, we need to create what are called setters and getters, where with a no-ar constructor, we can set this whatever we want later, and it doesn't have to be necessarily right when we create it like this. So let's just create one right now. So we're going to do set length, right? So I'm just going to auto-complete it for me, so you can just see it quickly out. So we got public, void, there's no return value, set length, the name of the argument, and we're passing to it double length. Now, you might not understand this, but this is exactly what's going on right here. And in fact, I can just change this to L and rearrange this line right here to be length equals L. This accomplishes the same thing. Alright, so we can do this for width too. So we just copy this. So we can change this to set width. We can just change the argument to W.
And we say width equals W.
Now we're not going to be doing this for area because area is something we calculate, and we're not necessarily giving it an area to set necessarily. So in fact, you don't really need that line of code right there. It's unnecessary. We will be creating area later. So now let's do the get. So we're setting it, but what if we want to retrieve that value? We want to say that's the value of it, right? So we do get. I'm just going to auto-complete it here again. So this is not void this time. This has return value, so we got to specify the type of return value. And this is double, because all our values are doubles. And we're calling it get length. We're not passing any arguments, we're just returning a value, which is we see right here, returning length. Right? So when we create the rectangle, we're automatically declaring and initializing width and length to both be 0. So without changing anything, if we run get length after this, which we can only do after we do this, we can then get the length, which will return 0. Now let's say we set it to a completely different value. Let's say we run set length and we pass in like 2. Then if we call get length, it's going to return 2 because it remembers. So now let's do get width, public double get width, and we're returning width. So now this is basic information about your rectangle. So we have our no argument constructor. We have an argument constructor, 2 arguments. We have our setters, and we have our getters. Now, in the previous way I showed you, we were able to set the area right here. We can literally just copy this, basically. But I'm not gonna. So we're doing it this way. So this is gonna be for area. This is gonna calculate area. So we're gonna do public. We're returning a value, double, and we're just gonna call this get area. And then we're gonna open parentheses. And all we're gonna do is return length times width. And this will return area. So this is going to do the exact same thing as this. So we have to make sure so this will work either way. So we just create it, a length is 0, width is 0, we call get area. It's going to return length times width, 0 times 0, which is 0, and it'll return 0. So now that we have our basic rectangle class figured out, how do we test it? Well, we got to test it using a different file. So we call the files that test our classes drivers. So I'm just going to create a new file. I'm going to call this rectangle driver.java. So I have to make sure this file is in the same directory as our regular file. You can just ignore the package declaration at the top of the file until it disappears eventually later in the video. So let's just get started. Let's create a main. So now with our main, let's create a rectangle. So I'm going to do that by calling rectangle. I'm going to give this a name. I'm going to call this R, for simplicity's sake, equals new rectangle. Parentheses, open parentheses. So we can see here that we have the option for a no argument constructor and an argument constructor, one where we're passing in width and length, and one when we're not. So we're just going to do this now just to show you how it looks. So you might recognize this same syntax from Scanner. You might recognize it from ArrayList. And you will be seeing this a lot because this is how you pretty much get any other information. Let's print out some values. System.out.println, and let's just print r.getLength. Let's make sure we specify length of the rectangle is. Throw in our plus sign to concatenate that onto it. Make sure we throw a space so it's not like just nothing there. And let's do the same for the width. So let's just copy this. Copy, paste. The width of the rectangle is r.getWidth. And let's see the area too. So let's just paste it again. The area of the rectangle is r.getArea. So let's compile and run it. So javac rectangle driver.java, because this is the file that we're actually running. We're not running this file. We're running this file. This file just happens to be using this file. So if we go hit enter now, see it compile successfully. And then if we run it, show us the correct answer that the length of the rectangle is 0, the width is 0, and therefore the area is 0 because we passed in 0 arguments. Now let's actually use the methods we created and let's mess with the rectangle a bit. So let's say r.setWidth, and let's pass in 3. And then let's do r.setLength, and let's pass in 6. So now if we compile and run it again, we should see length of 6, width of 3, and an area 6 times 3, 18. So if we compile this again, and run it. See, length is 6, width 3, area of the rectangle is 18. Now we could have easily done this using scanner, but I decided not to for the sake of time and simplicity, that you can easily just do this with scanner. You know how to do this with scanner. So that's pretty much how you use methods in Java. I just want to do one last thing over the rectangle. I'm just going to create another method for perimeter, just in case you decided, like, I want to add more stuff to this. So we can do public double, say get perimeter, and so we know that perimeter of rectangle is 2 times the length plus 2 times the width. So we can say return 2 times length plus 2 times the width. And it's okay to leave it like this because Java does follow the order of operations, PEMDAS. So it will calculate this first and then calculate that, so you don't have to worry about like wrapping this in parentheses. So we can just paste this again in here, and we could say the perimeter of the rectangle is blank. And we make sure we change it to get perimeter. So now if we run this again, compile and run it, we see that the perimeter of the rectangle is 18, which so happens to match the area of the rectangle. So that's about it for methods. I could probably make about one more possibly video on Java on just about like minor things that you can do, like printf, escape characters for printing, doing some other math and stuff, maybe, I don't know. I'd have to think about it. But yeah, if you need any help with the coding, link to my Discord will be in the pinned comment and in the description of the video. If you don't feel like that, you can always just leave a comment on the video asking for help, and I'd be glad to give it a shot to help you out. Leave a like, subscribe. Remember to take a look at like other videos out there. Like, I showed you what I can. I described it the best way I could. But if there's something else you want to look at, then look it up on YouTube or ask it in the comments or whatever. Doesn't matter. It's just that if you want to learn a language, you gotta get out there. You gotta get help. And this is my way of providing some of that help. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.